Teens are tough. Most parents will tell you it's a time for attitude, distance, and a lot of emotions.
The nature of adolescent development at the brain level puts everything on steroids.
Today, we get insight from three-time New York Times best-selling author and adolescent psychologist, Dr. Lisa Damour, about what your teen is really going through and how you should be reacting.
It's really worth it to say something like, I'm going to pretend like I didn't hear that, or why don't you take that again, or excuse me,
yeah.
In sort of a humorous way.
Yeah.
But something to just let the kid reset.
And later in the show, did you know most kids actually want to unplug and get away from their cell phone? The new study that may surprise you. That's today on Mom Squad. Welcome to Mom Squad. I'm Maureen Kyle. If you have a teenager in the house, I don't have to tell you, there's typically a roller coaster of emotions. There's pressure at school, with friends, social media, all of this while their brains and bodies are changing. Today, we talk to a woman who is the expert on the topic of teens, Dr. Lisa Damour. She has written 3 New York Times best-selling books about teens' emotional development. Her latest book is The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, Raising Connected, Capable, and Compassionate Adolescents. And just recently, Dr. Lisa made a big announcement on her Instagram page. So Lisa, big announcement, Inside Out 2, that is so exciting. How did they get in touch with you?
So I got a call through a group I work with that helps me arrange speaking engagements, and they said Pixar has reached out. They want to talk with you about Inside Out 2.
Wow.
This was in 2020. So I've been sitting on this for a very long time. And so I got on a Zoom because it was May 2020. So it was, right when the pandemic was really getting underway. Got on a Zoom with multiple people on the Pixar team, and they're all sitting there with my book Untangled and my book Under Pressure, which is about stress and anxiety in girls. And we started a 4-year conversation about adolescent development and health and emotions and what young people need from us. And the movie will hit theaters on June 14th. I am so excited for people to be able to see it. It is so smart, it is so thoughtful, it's funny, and it also tells a really true story about adolescence.
What a great way to, I was just telling you off camera that even Inside Out 1, was so insightful for me as a parent, and then just even thinking about how I process my own emotions. How is this going to be different for parents who have teens? I'm asking selfishly here, as somebody, my oldest girl is 10. I'm about to have 13-year-old Riley in my house. Is it educational? Is this going to really be able to show what kids are thinking at that age?
Absolutely. It's an extraordinary look at adolescence. And there's so much good about it, but part of what I love is that I think it will help parents of teenagers feel less isolated. I think a lot of times when your kid turns 13 and is suddenly very emotional, very intense, and not always that nice, I think a lot of parents feel like, why is this happening? Is this just happening to us? Has something gone wrong? And so at baseline, what the movie does is just say, this is adolescence, and this is typical and expectable adolescence. This is not personal. This is your kid growing up. And then the movie deals with themes around anxiety and perfectionism and peer relationships in a sort of extraordinary, magical way that Pixar does things, where the themes are spot on, the messages are so useful, and yet it's all packaged in this engaging, compelling, truly entertaining film. I mean, it's like so cool. And so I think people will enjoy it, and I think they will understand their kids better. I think their kids will understand themselves better. And I just can't wait for people to see it.
And I love how you just said that kids will understand themselves better, because I remember being a teen. And I never was self-analyzing, like, oh, I must be crying today because I must be, my hormones must be changing, my brain's changing. Like, we don't have that insight. So when kids understand what they're going through, even if it's just a little window, how does that help open up conversation?
Well, so I can tell you about a scene from the movie. I've checked with the publicity team about what I can and can't say.
Good, we're getting a preview.
And there's an early scene. So the character Anger was one of the early.
My favorite.
Yeah, he's really a riot. So he's the old crew of emotions are in the new film, and then there's 4 new emotions. But there is a part early in the movie where the puberty button has been installed on the panel.
Yes.
And then we cut to Riley, and she gets mad at her mom, and she gets really mad at her mom. And then back in her mind, all of the emotions turn on anger, and they're like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I barely touched you." Yeah. So I was like, oh my gosh, like what a creative depiction of when puberty comes along, emotions become amplified. Sophia's like, I barely touch it, and she's like, yeah. So I think that I can just see that landing in somebody's kitchen.
Right.
And talking with their kid about a very intense reaction. And rather than it being personal between parent and teenager, they start to recognize this is natural to puberty, this is a function of development, and the kid is probably just as shocked as the parent is by the intensity of the feeling.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Now I've been doing my homework here, The Emotional Lives of Teenagers. We'll get the full photo there. But getting that insight into what is happening inside their brain. I mean, Inside Out 2 is going to cover it, but then to give parents a handbook here. Where do you think we should start? There are books. Lisa has written books, but it's exploring the emotions that the teens are going through, why they're going through it, some of the myths that surround teens and parents who take it personally, and you really put a good lens on that. This is not personal. This is how they're developing. Yeah. So what do you think parents need to understand first and foremost when it comes to teens' emotions?
So the first thing to understand is that the nature of adolescent development at the brain level puts everything on steroids. So the negative emotions are more negative. The positive emotions are more positive, right? I mean, we can think back to adolescence and like the kind of charge that things had. Like that's also true in a positive way. So everybody should expect things to be sort of amplified. This hits its peak around 13 or 14 and actually tapers off. So most people feel like their 13 and 14-year-olds are far more dysregulated than their 17, 18-year-olds. So I want people to know that, because I think sometimes people think 13, this is how we're coming out of the gate for adolescence. Like, where is this headed? It's usually headed down. Yeah. But the thing that I also want people to know, and this is so important right now when we're talking about adolescent mental health so much and there's so much concern about their well-being, is that mental health is actually not for any of us, teenagers included, it's not about feeling good. We're supposed to have the full range of emotions, and that's part of why I love working with Pixar, right? Like, all of these emotions are natural to being a person, including the negative ones or the uncomfortable ones. And where psychologists come in when we're assessing mental health questions, it's not the presence or absence of painful emotions. We expect those. It's how they're handled. And what we want to see is that emotions are managed in a way that brings relief and does no harm, helps the person feel better, doesn't come at a cost. So in teenagers, the kinds of things we want to see. So say they've had a very bad day. Teenagers will have a very bad day. The kinds of things we expect to see is that when teenagers come home, they may want to cry. Psychologists like crying. It actually calms the central nervous system. They may want to go for a run. They may want to watch a TV show they loved as a kid. They may want, as one teenage girl said to me, to force cuddle their cat. They will listen to music. They do all of these wonderful things. Highly adaptive. They may want to talk about their feelings, but they may not. Hugely adaptive, brings relief, does no harm. We only worry when the way emotions are managed is costly. Abusing substances, being hard on other people, being unkind to themselves, then we worry about health, mental health, what's happening. But part of why I wrote this book and part of what we need to make clear is that teenagers are allowed to get upset. All of us are allowed to get upset. And that I don't want parents to be frightened that the presence of an uncomfortable emotion is on its own grounds for concern.
We are going to have much more on how to decode your teen's emotions with Dr. Lisa D'Amour right after this.
Adolescence is not something our kids are doing to us. It is a very challenging developmental time that they are working their way through.
But parents want to help. Coming up, Dr. D'Amour shares when you should start to worry and answers that burning question, why does it seem my kids are so bothered by me?
We are back talking about your big kids and their big emotions. Dr. Lisa Damour is a New York Times best-selling author and psychologist that specializes in teens development. So then I'm picturing emotional teen who had a bad day, and you mentioned, wanting to go and listen to music or wanting to go, and there's that isolation. And I think what I hear most from parents who say, oh gosh, this is so hard. She doesn't want to talk to me. He doesn't want to open up to me. And you just listed those things of, how do we know that there is no sort of self-harm, or they're not lashing out at a friend at school? Like, how do we get them to open up? And can we? Or is that making it worse?
Okay, well, so let's talk about why they don't open up. Because I've asked teenagers this very question. I'm like, those times when your parent or caregiver can see you're upset and you are giving them nothing, like, what's the deal? And they're like, oh, there's many reasons. So one reason they said is, we know what you're gonna say. Like, I'm upset because I messed up a test, and it's the test you asked me if I was ready for, and I told you yes, but apparently I wasn't, and I don't want to hear it. Okay, that's a reason. Sometimes we're afraid you're going to tell other people. These things feel very private to teenagers, even if they don't seem like a big deal to us, and so they can be reluctant to share because they don't want it going anywhere. But my favorite response I ever got, and it was so insightful, it was this junior girl, and she said, by the time I get home, I'm like 90% of the way over what made me upset. And rehashing the whole thing for my mom isn't going to help me feel better, which is totally fair. So talking is an option if the teenager wants to do it. It is one of many options. Okay, but then there's the when to worry question, right? You have a kid who seems very shut down or very reserved, and you get anxious. So what I can tell you is, what we expect to see is that kids are thriving outside of the home, and they come home and are sort of grumpy or cranky or quiet. If you as a parent or caregiver check in with the school and they're like, your kid's great, they're so chatty, they're so fine. Even if you're like, my kid? That's what we expect to see in development. If other adults are worried about your kid, if you are hearing concerning signs from other places besides your kid being reclusive at times and grumpy in the house, then it's time to worry. But one of the things I like to say, it's kind of corny, but school gets the best of them, we get the rest of them. And that's really like, how wouldn't we want it just that way, right? It's hard to hold it together all day at school.
But then so many parents take it personally. I know we've talked about it before on this show, but then it's hard because then, and again, my oldest is 10, so I know I'm headed for this, but what I hear from all my friends is like, well then, I'm getting the rest of them. And I want to know what's happening in their lives, and I want to make sure that I'm having that relationship. But inside their minds, are they going, oh, mom is so uncool. I don't want to, is that what's happening in their minds? Or is it that they do want their privacy, and maybe are they worried, mom's going to be disappointed or dad's going to be disappointed?
Okay. Yes to all of that.
Okay.
All right, so let's start with a few ways to understand
this. Is my own therapy session here.
You got it. I'll bill you later. Okay. First of all, the job of a teenager is to become independent, to get ready to move out. This is quite a job to try to accomplish while your parents know what you ate, how long you slept, if you wore that t-shirt yesterday, right? I mean, we have so much information about our kids. So part of how kids work towards independence is they first accomplish a psychological independence. I'm just gonna be more private while you guys drive me everywhere and know all the other details. So that's part of what's happening. Another way we wanna think about this is, I mentioned my first commercial book, Untangled. It centers on girls, 80% applies to kids of all genders. And what I do in that book is I lay out the 7 jobs of being a teenager. Those are the chapter titles. So it's parting with childhood, joining a new pack, harnessing emotions, contending with adult authority, planning for the future, entering the romantic world, and learning how to care for themselves. Okay, that's a lot to accomplish. And the reason I wrote that book, and the reason I wrote it that way, is to remind adults, adolescence is not something our kids are doing to us. It is a very challenging developmental time that they are working their way through. Okay, the last thing I will say, in this book, The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, I have a section called Why Your Teen Hates How You Chew. And it is about them wanting to establish their own identity and wanting to do that separate from us. And there is a window, usually around 13, 14, where anything we do that does not fit with their emerging sense of self, or brand as I call it, bothers them. And anything we do that is like their emerging sense of self bothers them. So everything we do bothers them. But it's part of development, and there's nothing wrong here or broken, and it's not nearly as personal as it feels.
Yeah, so that's why they act annoyed with parents all the time. It's just they're trying to get that independence.
They're trying to develop their own separate sense of self, and that's really hard to do. When, especially, you know, when they've been little kids, like, we're so involved in their lives, right? So the less personally adults take this, the better it goes.
So then how should a parent react? I mean, you get the teen attitude thrown at you, you know, oh, that is so, I can't believe you like that song, you know. And I remember, I don't think she watches, but my sister, I remember my sister, she was my little sister. Everything, like if I liked the song, then, oh, she hated that song, you know, and I remember it was probably around that age, and I kept being like, well, you used to love everything I did, you know, even as a sibling, but like now I'm sure I can see it as a parent too. So what's the reaction? Like, how do you handle those moments of where the teen is annoying? Is annoyed by you.
Right, or being rude. I mean, they can be rude, no question. So here's a few options. One is you can lay out some ground rules. So you can say, look, there's three ways we can be together. You can be nice, that's my favorite. You can be polite to me, or you can tell me you need some space, but everything else is off the table. So you can just make some rules. There's also times, and this is not rare, where a teenager says something really unkind or says it in a really nasty tone, and the second it's out of their mouth, the teenager themselves is like, I wish I hadn't said that, right? And we have to remember, they've held it together all day. These are tired kids. They have strong impulses. Their mouths get ahead of their brains. I mean, we have to make space for that. And so if an adult suspects that that is what happened, it's really worth it to say something like, I'm going to pretend like I didn't hear that. Or, why don't you take that again? Or, excuse me? You know, in sort of a humorous way. But something to just let the kid reset. Acknowledge that the kid already knows they've messed up, not turn it into a big deal. Those kinds of phrases are often very, very helpful in parenting teenagers.
Now, we talked a lot about what's happening inside the mind of your teen, but there are also a lot of external factors that can play into your child's emotions. Next week, we are back with Dr. Lisa Damour to talk about all of those external factors that can influence your teen's emotions.
Coming up, does your teen say they can't live without their phone? A new study shows they actually feel the opposite.
I think it's really distracting, especially when I'm trying to do schoolwork, so it's probably good, like, for the best when I'm off of it.
How time away from their phone can increase their happiness.
Welcome back. I bet if you have a teen, a popular threat of punishment is to take away their cell phone. But what if they secretly want time away? That's what a new study out of the Pew Research Center shows. 75% of kids reported being happier without their cell phones. Matt Clindescent from Harrisburg has more.
It seems increasingly harder to put our cell phones out of reach, but new research suggests some teens may be trying to cut down on screen time. According to a Pew Research study, 74% of teens say they feel happier without their smartphones, while another 72% say they feel more peaceful.
I definitely agree that I'm happier when I'm not on it as much.
Your college freshman, Jenna McNamara, says she tries to limit her screen time so that she stays focused on her classes.
I think it's really distracting, especially when I'm trying to do schoolwork, so it's probably good, like, for the best when I'm off of it.
Meanwhile, senior Roberto Morazan says he drastically changed how he uses his phone since high school.
When I was a teenager, it was more games, it was for like YouTube videos. Now as a young professional, it's more like emails from teachers, from homeworks, daily news.
The study comes as child advocates worry about the relationship teenagers have with their phones and social media. Dr. Dara Babinski, a child psychologist at Penn State Health, says questions over mental health concerns concerns remain.
We really also don't understand how cell phone use, social media use potentially reduces risk for these problems, but more likely exacerbates risk for these problems.
Family physician Dr. Chris McCarty adds that families need to have honest conversations about having a healthy relationship with cell phones.
So taking time out of your day to put your phones down, having like certain set times, whether it's, for dinner or different times at night, that you don't engage in any type of social media use or any type of phone use.
Stay tuned to Mom Squad in the coming weeks. We are going to take a deep dive into new cell phone policies in school districts across the country. Many school districts are banning cell phones in classrooms, but what does this mean for you keeping in touch with them? You're going to see that episode in about 2 weeks. Thanks for joining us here on Mom Squad. We're going to see you next week for more in-depth conversation about your teen's emotional health.